the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the true custodians of the lands upon which we are, the Darambo, and pay our respects to the past, present and emerging. Mari oho, mari tu, mari ora kia tātou, hōmia, huie, taikie. That's a key welcome in the Kiwi language, and it just means let's bring our spirits to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to talking to you and letting the viewer into this world about, I call it citizenship, or global competence, and it's nothing new really, but we spend a lot of time teaching let's call it the content for kids and the next generation, but you are an expert in this world. So what exactly is global citizenship competence? What is it?
It's a huge question, and I certainly would say I'm a learner in this world, not an expert. But I think I often use a slide in my presentation, a rose by any other name, because sometimes we talk about 21st century skills, global citizenship, global competence, intercultural understanding, education for sustainable development. That is the field that I play in. And I think it's really important that we don't get into definitional wars, because I think that sometimes gets in our way when what we're all trying to achieve is good humans and planetary flourishing. So we might have different nuances, different directions as to how we get there, but the big picture is what's important. So I guess one of the best ways to explain it is that UNESCO in November last year released their recommendation.
2023.
Yes, correct. So their recommendation, which is the shortened version, they're calling Human Rights, Peace and Sustainability, but the long name for it includes global citizenship, intercultural understanding, competence, collaboration, and I think it was UN's way of saying this is the big picture of what we're trying to achieve with education. And as you say, that's not content. Because yes, we use the content, and it's vitally important that we use the content, but we need to develop students' conceptual understanding. We need to develop their skills. We need to develop the values and attitudes that will enable them to engage with their community, whether that's the local Bundaberg community where I come from, or whether it's the global community.
So I'm always going to have to retract my original question about not content, because obviously it's a conversation about some kind of content.
Yes.
And let me take a step back a moment and ask you, Karena. So is this a kind of a debate for policymakers, and are we trying to get the kids to understand global policy, or is this something that happens in schools?
It's something that does or should be happening in every type of education. Okay. I think the important thing is, and probably one of the reasons that I've ended up playing in the policy space, is too often we put pressure on schools that schools have to achieve all of this, and by the time they graduate from year 12, they're supposed to be these global citizens. These days we use that term education to be talking about the university space, the vet space, the informal education spaces, the NGOs and not-for-profits that work in education, because like the Sustainable Development Goals, this is a global thing. This is something we've got to achieve together for all peoples of all ages. This is not something we can put on the primary teachers and say, get it done by year 6. So
is UNESCO, with their plans, are they saying we've got to do a certain thing or talk about a certain thing in a certain way?
No. None of this work is, and it shouldn't be, dogmatic, because we know, depending on the cultural context that we're working with, depending on the religious context that we're working with, global citizenship education, we'll just use that term for the moment, looks very different in every context. But I think what is universal is the outcomes that we're looking for. The knowledge, skills, values and attitudes that can allow people to engage, gain employment in, contribute to their communities, no matter where they are and who they're working with.
So is this going back to this, and I like this idea of it's almost like what's the flavour of the month or everything. Yeah. So is this about that old-fashioned ideal about learning to talk to everybody, about important matters that are local, call it statewide or global? Is it a form of talking?
I think it's beyond talking because it's got to be internalised. One of the things that we do find is we can teach you the skills, but if you don't have, for example, the motivations to engage in sustainable practices, you can have all the skills in the world, but you won't do it. So we talk a lot about engaging the heart as well as the head. And it's not a new expression. I mean, if we go back to the Treasures Within, UNESCO's original learning document back in 1996, it was talking about learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and the newest one was learning to transform ourselves and our society. So that's back in 1996. Then policy documents have evolved, and of course we have SDG 4, and in particular Target 4.7 that talks about global citizenship, education for sustainable development. And now we have these new recommendations. The recommendations are described as guiding principles. Even though all 194 countries signed up to it and adopted them, they can't tell the country to do this. And they should never tell a nation state how to educate their children. They're just giving them some guiding principles as to the skills, the knowledge those children might need to engage effectively.
So it would be going back to that idea about, let's call it global competence.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, how would that look in, let's say, Australia compared to Japan? Is this part of what this work you're doing is, bringing together these different actors and letting them all talk about how they would do it differently in a way?
Absolutely. That's in fact the actual project that we're working on at the moment, that one of our consortium partners is from university in Japan. And the perspective that comes into their classrooms is going to be, it's these universal values, but the way in which the pedagogical approaches that are used are going to be very different. We work with students in Indonesia, for example, where we know that the Islamic faith is shaping a lot of the work that they're doing, but the values align. So it's going to be very different in every context. And the thing that's really important at the moment is we have pockets of excellence in schools, in universities, in certain countries. What I guess we're trying to achieve with the latest recommendations is to make that systemic. Because unless you flag it at policy level, and that's what we're doing, we're trying to develop a roadmap to help guide countries to make it systemic.
So that brings me to that next thing. One of the things you do, you're also a researcher.
Yes.
In global, call it competence. Tell me, what kind of things do you research?
Most of my work, I really love to do evidence-based, practically oriented evidence-based work. So an example of that would be the work that we did with the Department of Education in Queensland, where we worked with 22 schools to develop a framework of global competence as what does a whole school approach to educating for global competence look like at the beginning, the developing, embedding, and leading stages. And we divided that across things like, co-design teaching and learning, whole school approaches, partnerships with schools and communities, because all of those things have to come together for this to really work. Interesting.
And did you find out anything you didn't expect to find out? This is a question we always ask researchers. They have these great plans and they're going to find out this and that. Is there anything that you felt, I didn't expect that?
I think it's not so much what was unexpected as we keep pushing it to the next level. To give an example of that, in developing this framework, for example, we talked a lot about safe spaces, spaces where teachers, students, parents felt safe to bring their perspectives and discuss them. We then took it to the next level, or the next concept of brave spaces, where it was okay to challenge in respectful ways. It's okay to challenge those perspectives if somebody feels uncomfortable with them or feels that they are not as inclusive as they could be. So I think it's for me, the exciting part of the research is the way that it's constantly evolving as we learn new perspectives and we bring in new pedagogical approaches.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you so much for that conversation, and it does remind me of those difficult conversations with adolescents who definitely want to push it to the next level. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.